Welcome, everyone. My name is Chris Paoli, Redmond Mag editor, and I am pleased to be moderating our first session, as well as welcoming you to our Azure Virtual Desktop 101, Go Beyond VDI for Your Hybrid Workforce Summit, brought to you by Nerdio, Control Up, and Remo3. The editorial staff of Redmond Mag have worked hard to bring together some of the best independent experts on this topic for this event, so we really hope you enjoy it. Before we start today's event with these three great sessions, we do have some announcements. First, we want to let you know this event is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. You'll receive an email when the replay is available, generally within the next few days. Each of today's three sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. So please be sure to put your questions into the Q&A area of your console as they come up so we can get them answered for you. During today's third session, we will be giving away a GoPro Hero 10, but you must be present to win. So be sure to stay on for the entire event. Finally, we do have resources from our sponsors, Nerdio, Control Up, and Remo3 available on the console right now. So please download and check those out. It's because of Nerdio, Control Up, and Remo3 underwriting of this content that we can bring you this summit. So we thank them for sponsoring and supporting the community and ask that you check out these resources so we can bring you more events like this in the future. Now on to the first session of today's summit, Azure Virtual Desktop Crash Course, Pros, Cons, and Caveats. This session features Greg Schulz, founder of independent IT analyst firm StorageIO. Greg Schulz is a founder and senior advisor at StorageIO, an independent IT advisory, consultancy, and creative service firm. A Microsoft MVP in cloud data center management and a 10-time VMware vExpert, he brings a diverse background to his work as a consulting analyst with real-world perspective across applications, data infrastructure, hardware, software, and clouds. He's also the author of several books. Take it away, Greg.
Thanks, Chris. Hello and welcome everyone to today's session, Azure Crash Course, Pros, Cons, Caveats. I'm Greg Schulz, and let's get started after that intro. And as Chris mentioned, as part of the summit today, we're going to get started here with a crash course. And here's our agenda, what we're going to go over. Azure Virtual Desktop, EVD. We'll use that acronym now and then. Getting started. We're going to look at some trends, issues, challenges. In other words, what's the need? Looking a little bit closer at Azure Virtual Desktop, initially recurring management, best practices, tips, next steps, and of course, Q&A. So with that, feel free to submit your questions as we go. And as Chris mentioned, this will be recorded, so you can go back and listen and refresh yourself on that. Okay, so kicking things off, big picture here. The big picture is, think in terms of layers, and also we're going to look at layers vertically up and down, but also across different platforms, environments, horizontally. And with that said is that think of this as from on-prem core, on-prem edge, public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, super cloud, whatever your preference, hosting, managed service providers, colos, etc. Think of those as that horizontal, and then that vertical are the different layers, the infrastructure as resources, the platforms as a service, the management tools worked in there, different software, different layers for different functionality. And the common theme across all of those is how are you interacting with it? That whether that be a laptop, a workstation, a tablet, a smartphone device, what kind of device are you using to interact with the different applications, the different layers, the different resources, whether it's for management, whether it's for running something like a Salesforce or an Office or O365, or accessing virtual desktop, which is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time today. But that you've got these different layers and using different devices for accessing and working with the different components in those stacks. So as we move on, is going in a little bit deeper here, is the what is Azure Virtual Desktop? And some are going to call it Azure, some like Azure. We're not going to worry about that. But what is the Azure Virtual Desktop, or AVD? Well, it's real simple. AVD is an Azure cloud-based virtual desktop, aka VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure. It is having that ability, or giving that ability, to run an app to push that virtual desktop out to different devices, whether it be a regular workstation, laptop, PC, tablet, smartphone, Droid, iOS, whatever it happens to be. Not to be confused with remote desktop protocol per se, or RDP, where you go from one system, a local Windows or a local Linux, where you RDP into another system or another server to do things. Think of it as your desktop being abstracted away from that physical device such that you can access it in different locations. We'll go into more of the details, the nuances as we go on, but it's that desktop image that was normally tied to, that had affinity to that physical device that you work with, where now it's abstracted and it can be accessed from different locations, from different devices as you work around. Okay, so how do you access it? Well, with a Windows or Mac iOS, Android type device, a Linux device, or even a web browser. AVD, or Azure Virtual Desktop, is an alternative to traditional physical desktop infrastructures, whether it be on-prem core or edge virtual desktops, i.e. What we might know as Citrix or VMware Horizon, among others, or other cloud-based VDIs, i.e. Those from AWS, Google, among others. It is also an alternative to O365 cloud-based software as a service. In other words, where you can connect to the Office 365 with the emphasis there around Office-type functionality, using things like Outlook, PowerPoint, Excel, Word, and the different associated tools, depending on what subscription you're at. There's also, not to be confused, as M365, which takes that O365 as a cloud service a step further, that gives you not only those SaaS workspaces, that Office functionality online, but it's also giving you additional capabilities, including desktop as a service, or a variation of virtual desktop. And we'll put the emphasis around here right now as a preview, because things are changing, things are dynamic. But for our discussion today, is that also under preview, AVD is available via Stack Solutions. For example, Azure HCI as one of the services offering there. And again, I'm going to just put around parentheses for the time being, under preview. But what that means is that you've got that flexibility of using, consuming, delivering, leveraging Azure Virtual Desktop from the cloud, but also via a private cloud or on-prem. Okay, so let's move on here. And why virtual desktops? Just take that a little bit step back. Why the virtual desktop? And real simple, it's abstraction. It releases the desktop environment from a physical device. It's for consolidation, if you want, to be able to consolidate and use less costly, less performance-capable devices for those applications, those workers, those users that don't need a real robust laptop or a real robust workstation, but they need something more than just a terminal. It's for mobility, remote access of those desktop workspace environments while on the go. The agility, which ties into mobility, but to be able that desktop environment to move, migrate, relocate, support mobility, but also to grow, shrink, and contract the underlying resources. From a manageability standpoint, for enhancing security, data protection, backup, remediation, updates, patches, fixes. but also the flexibility to adapt to changing workloads, seasonality, technology adoption, then deployment. Certainly scalability is rapid deploy and be able to put a lot more compute resources without having them physically tied up, for example, on a desktop. To put the back-end functionality to run the apps, to run the workloads, to support the users, and to be able to burst that. So, for example, Monday morning comes along, everybody's going into their virtual desktop. They're going to go and do whatever it is they're doing. Some are just checking emails. Some have to get that presentation done. Some are working on Excel models or whatever it happens to be. But that crunch of that workload, that ability to, on the back end, is burst up the compute, burst up the networking, the storage, all the underlying resources to burst to support that Monday morning, then as it tails off during the day, and then maybe later in the week when there's another spike, to be able to adjust to that. So that from a cost standpoint, from a consumption standpoint, you can start to adjust that dynamic workflow. Then there's that scalability tied into all the above, certainly cost, optimizing, reducing, shifting. And in the past, virtual desktop cost optimization was around consolidation to cut cost, but potentially at the risk of compromising and causing productivity, other bottlenecks elsewhere. Part of cost optimization is, are you overspending? Do you have over-provisioned and underutilized? But also the inverse of that, which is to boost service. Do you have any apps, any workers, any workloads that are being starved, that they're not given enough resources? They don't have enough compute. They don't have enough memory. They don't have enough performance underlying resources to get their job done quickly. And here's the real sum it all up. Why? It's to spend less time on your data infrastructure task. In other words, on back end. Spend more time on the business at hand, or spend more time on optimizing, new images, workload, taking care of the users, taking care of the business. Okay, so moving on. What are some of the trend issues, challenges, in other words, the need? Well, we've touched on these to a degree. But just to go through real quickly, there is that continued growth of work from home, mobile work for is people working from locations, not being tied down to a desk, to a particular office or cube. Now, we've seen in the past, virtual desktop has played into that, where you don't have your workstation sitting in a cube because that cube might tear. So we've seen that ability where you go and you log in and you get your desktop on the device at that particular location. But we're also seeing that increase in the number and type of new apps as well as existing apps, and those existing apps are becoming more robust, having more needs and users depending on them. But we're also seeing leveraging the physically smaller devices, whether it be workstations, tablets, phones, laptops. Part of that ties into that portability, not having to lug or not having to have a big, heavy resource to be able to get your work done with what you need. And then you have that flexibility of using browsers and thin clients via your smartphones, your devices. Part of that ties into the management, which also means that from a security and management perspective, that you can issue a desktop out, but you can also revoke it. Someone goes to leave, well, you turn off, you disable that virtual desktop image, that even if there was something still out on that particular users, you can revoke that such that if they go in and try to do something, it's revoked. It's been removed. It's virtually removed, as opposed to old school of having to ship your laptop back in or your device or whatever. So then there's also the need around cost optimization, and not just simply shifting from capital expenditure, CapEx, to OpEx, but also going in now and looking at, hey, we moved everything from CapEx expending over to OpEx, but now we got an OpEx problem. Well, okay, what can we do to go in there and optimize without causing more problems, without cutting and costing the business in terms of service levels. So there's also this need for faster deployment, provisioning, and remediation at scale. If you've got 1,000 desktops, how can you push out the updates, whether they be an operating system or a low-level firmware or something in between? How can you push those updates out and on a schedule and do it proactively at scale? And maybe it's not 1,000, maybe it's 20. Maybe it's 2,000 or 20,000. So there's part of that remediation at scale. And there's other aspect to it, which is VDI is being used beyond the traditional consolidation, thin client to reduce costs. It's now being used for heavy compute, for graphics, for power users that need that capability of having their desktop as they move around, but without lugging all the associated files and complexity with them, so that they can move around and that they can work in a shared collaborative type environment. All right. So a couple of other issues here. Not all apps, not all users, and not all devices are the same. There are the different resource needs and demands, whether it be compute, whether it be storage, network, specialty devices, graphic processing units or GPUs, different types of storage where you need low latency or a lot of capacity. Not all apps are mobile device app ready or browser friendly. In other words, there might be an app that is just not available on a mobile device, so you still have to run it through a web browser or a traditional desktop sort of environment. So part of that is that bridging, that abstraction, being able to support the different needs. And we're also seeing that thin app device clients also swinging back to where we went from lots of thin clients, light, low-cost, low-powered type devices to thicker or heavier workstation tablets, laptops that are supporting that local need, but also that virtual desktop capability. And that's just reflective of that there's different needs and not everything needs to be treated the same. Likewise, not all users are mobile. Some are in the office, some are at the core, the edge, or elsewhere, working from home. And the other piece here is that apps themselves are located in different locations. Some are on-prem, some are at the edge, some are in the different clouds. Real quickly here, what I want to show is that we've talked about some of the different issues, but here's something that we just have to put on the table. And that is around threats, security, keeping everything safe. In other words, we've got this very mobile, dynamic environment. There's a lot of threats. There's a lot of challenges that are out there. And we have to keep that in perspective, is that we've got the work from home over there in the top left, but we've also got users that are using M365, Slack, Salesforce, O365, but they're coming in from different locations. They're working from an edge or a branch lower left. Hey, we got IoT devices out there. We've got people in the main core on-prem. They're kind of left center. And then we've got the different apps running in the cloud and elsewhere. But there's a lot of different threats. There's a lot of different challenges that bring in that whole security, that whole data protection aspect that we need to be aware of. It's not our focus today, but it ties into what our focus is, which is around the virtual desktop, the Azure Virtual Desktop. And these are just things that we have to keep in perspective because they do matter. They are part of the conversation. All right, so with that, let's continue our conversation, and let's take a closer look at Azure Virtual Desktop. And as we do that, we've got a couple pieces here to think about. Okay, so we've touched on why virtual desktop infrastructure, VDI, and AVD in general. And, we can get the apps via desktops, deliver the apps and desktops where needed. That's that flexibility, that mobility. that adaptability to change. And as we look here, there's a couple different pieces to it, which is that you have that ability to standardize your images. In the past, it was have different images, i.e. the operating system, the different apps that are bundled with it, how it's configured, what features are on, what features are disabled, authentication, certificates, rights management, different things like that, that image was deployed or put onto a device, a laptop, a tablet, before it was shipped out or handed to you. And then we've evolved that to that virtual, where instead of physically tying that to a device that's going out, that image of what goes on that laptop, that tablet, that device is thinner, but you now have this desktop image that's tied to a workspace that then can be pushed out, that has that portability depending and flexibility to be consumed, used by different devices for different needs. So it really comes back to spending less time on managing the underlying infrastructure and being able to deploy, provision, service the needs of those desktop users, consumers, quickly and at scale, whether you're scaling up or scaling down. There's the other aspects, which is to optimize your hardware and your software cost. First generation VDI, if you want to think of it that way, was around optimizing your CapEx, your capital expenditure, hardware cost, i.e. consolidate, shift the cost from the desktop platform to the servers, the virtual machines, and the software that supported them located somewhere else. That still continues, but now there is that focus around being able to leverage these capabilities from the cloud, have more flexibility, but also to boost your licenses. That if you had per seat licensing, if you were licensed for 1,000 users, but only 750 are ever active at one time, well, you've got 250 seat licenses there that, well, you're paying for, and maybe that's just because of the bundle. And that's where you get into some more flexibility of being able to leverage those licenses, where it's not for a given active or for a given seat one-to-one. It's based on how many are active, how many are currently using that. So you can start to get some better economies of scale, some better utilization, better efficiency, better effectiveness out of your software licenses. Again, that has a big bearing on your OpEx cost, as does recurring management. So there's also the ability to support the different platforms. And as we look at Azure Virtual Desktop, part of it is the management aspect. There is the back end to be able to support the dynamic needs, the image definition, the image pushing out, deployment, adding compute, networking, different storage, specialized devices, GPUs, and so forth, but also to be able to hybrid manage and to be able to coexist with your existing Citrix or your existing VMware that are part of, say, an Azure environment, and to be able to have a hybrid virtual management that if you're having to manage a heterogeneous or hybrid virtual desktop infrastructure, that you've got that capability from a management plane, a control plane, but also being able to allocate and run things, whether it's all the AVD or that Citrix or that VMware, so they can coexist. Again, spend less time on the infrastructure task. That's the recurring theme. So who is AVD for? Well, mobile, remote, as well as physical in office, the knowledge worker, the power user, as well as that light user that doesn't require a lot of compute capability. It's for traditional desktop infrastructures that need or want to virtualize. It's the alternative to the conventional terminal services and RDP access, as well as that alternative to existing cloud-based desktop as a service or VDI, i.e. Citrix, VMware, AWS, and so forth. It's also for those that are using O365 or M365 cloud SaaS workspace that need more functionality, or that you want different licensing, you want different cost optimizations as you scale, or as you scale the number or changing workload needs. But it's also for organizations that are exploring quote-unquote stacks. In other words, hyper-converged infrastructure, VDI solutions, whether it be for on-prem core or at the edge, where you're stacking all the different components, that vertical that we touched on, from the low-level hardware to the operating systems, hypervisors, containers, management, the whole stack, and being able to have that prepackaged in a hyper-converged stack-type solutions, but with that common control plane that you can manage from the cloud out to the virtual or out to the on-prem or edge. And it's also for users and apps that need flexible, scalable resources, and again, including special things like GPUs and so forth. Okay, so I mentioned O365 and I mentioned M365, and here's where there can be a little bit of confusion, perhaps a little bit of head scratching. Let's see, what's common about them? Well, common about them, they're all from Microsoft, at least when we talk about AVD. So O365 and M365 are similar, but yet they're different, okay? It's around simplicity, a desktop, and software as a service. So with the O365, it's about giving you that Office experience, but as a software, as a service, as a subscription. It's presented out to you from the cloud. You don't have to be running the O365 on your actual computer, or it doesn't have to be hosted somewhere that you're logging in to access it to be. Where the M365 just takes that basic O365 and gives you a little bit more capabilities, the ability to do a little bit more with additional apps. The key thing is that it's around simplicity, where you really don't want to deal with any of that back end. You just want it like you're using any other cloud service, cloud experience for consumption. But it's also based on a per user pricing, which for a small number, that can be actually attractive when you look at on a lower economy of scale, or for whatever it is, or a type of workload, a type of user, that could be very attractive on that per user pricing. But then what you might find out is that as you scale and increase that number, that low per user cost might actually be quite expensive as you start to scale and get into higher numbers of users. Okay, so that's where the AVD or the traditional VDI start to come into play, is that with the AVD, unlike traditional virtual desktops, like Windows virtual desktops, instead of running everything on your on-prem and you managing that entire stack from the low-level infrastructure as a service, the virtual machines, the physical machines, a lot of the underlying capabilities, that can be offloaded or abstracted, where a lot of that is being handled by the cloud, in this case, Azure. So you got that flexibility, you got that scalability, but you also have complete control over management and deployment, as well as integration with Citrix and VMware on Azure, integrated hybrid management. So the big difference also is that AVD is consumption-based pricing as opposed to per-user pricing, which means that if you have a lot more users, that it all depends on how they're consuming, what that consumption-based is, where your pricing model could come in. Do you have to be all AVD or all O365 or M365? No, everything's not the same. What makes sense for you? For your environment, you might have a hybrid. You might have a hybrid due to mergers, acquisitions, integration, changes, phase out, where you're running different on-prem VDIs, as well as you're running some O365, M365s, and you're making that migration to Azure, maybe away from AWS or in a hybrid. So it's how you're going to use these in different ways. The last one there, and again, we're going to put parens around in preview because things change, is that ability, instead of having the Azure Virtual Desktop running completely in the cloud at Azure, is that running in preview today, it's a work in progress today, is that you could be running it on Azure Stack, which is a hyper-converged infrastructure that physically goes into your on-prem core or edge environment with the hardware, with all the software stacks, as well as the management that has that common management plane, control plane, that you can look at things and work at things and manage things across that control plane. So those are a couple of different aspects to it. But let's go a little bit deeper. What are the main components? The main components for AVD, management tools. That is a real key. That's a recurring theme, but there's also the initial management and that recurring. There are the account and resource groups that are in different regions and have different levels of redundancy. There's the networking, the security, the identity management, whether it's traditional Active Directory AD, now known as Entra ID, or using a new Azure cloud-based AD/Entra ID, but also supporting the different devices. It's having the host pools, which are the virtual machines or the VMs, and their underlying storage, their underlying network, their underlying connectivity and security, along with session host and workspaces, such that as you're working from a device, a laptop, tablet, a smartphone, and you want your desktop, that desktop image, you're accessing your workspace, that desktop image is pushed out to your device. That now you can start working with it, but the compute where that application is actually running is running back on one of those virtual machines, running in the Azure, or if you're on the preview with the Azure Stack, running there, being managed from that common managed control plane. Then you also have different application groups, different images, desktops, and apps. You might have one for users that you might have your power users that are working with apps that have different configuration, different resource needs, that are maybe doing graphics, maybe they're doing engineering, maybe they're doing video editing, different things that in the past you're like, well, that doesn't belong on VDI. Well, you're pushing those apps out where they've got the desktop, they've got some data cached locally, but you're leveraging that back end to do your compute work. And then there's the different clients for accessing it, whether it be from an iOS, from a Droid, from a Windows client, or from a web browser on Linux, whatever it happens to be. So there's some other pieces to this. There are some optional components, things such as FS Logic, workspace, and user storage flexibility, where you're saving your data, how you're saving your data, how it's accessible as you go mobile. There's Intune for managing the security of identities, as well as of the apps and the different devices. There's Bastion, which is that secure RDP SSH capability, along with there's tools out there for part of Azure for firewall, for NAT, and DDoS protection. There's the Edge for peering, the virtual TPM for security. There's secure VMs or for confidential compute, GPUs, as well as other features, other resources. And as I mentioned before, there's also third-party integration management tools if you're running Citrix or VMware on Azure. And before, again, in parentheses, it's evolving, is Azure Stack HCI. All right, so a couple more pieces. What are some considerations and options when deploying AVD? Well, a couple of things here. Mobile and shared file system, file caching. You may need some amount of data actually on your local device, but to be able to have it so it's secure, but it's also being synced back to an authoritative copy and being that safe, secure, and to be able to revoke that access if or where needed. about scaling the redundancy, automation, different workspaces. Are they personal workspaces or are they pooled? Do you have pre-assigned or dynamic pools that your users, your desktops are a part of? And what type of that workspace? What are the different images? What are the different apps? Are you doing things like supporting multi-head workstation, multi-headed devices with multiple displays? Have you enabled watermarks such that when a user gets that virtual desktop, it's watermarked in some way such that if they do a control print screen and it's not disabled and they do a screen capture, that is watermarked or for security purposes. And then there are all the different security and compliance considerations and tools. Okay, well, that sets us up and puts us into the recurring management capability. And as we work our way through these, a couple different things. Again, everything is not the same, so why treat everything the same? And there's the user identity, credentials, data protection. There's more devices, more apps, more. But there's also that need for cost optimization, regulatory compliance and governance, cost optimization, that speed of provisioning, support for the different devices. And as we dig into this, the initial management, going from that proof of concept, that testing, that familiarization, there's actually, you can go into the Azure page and actually spin up a Azure Virtual Desktop on your own for free and try different things out, get some experience, see what works, how it works, what the different pieces are, but also start planning. How are you going to manage it? How are you going to scale that? Doing your research. What do you need to assess of your existing environment? Tooling are you going to have or update? What scripts? What tools do you need to set up or to automate that you're going to put into a PowerShell or use the Azure Cloud CLI? What are your policies, your templates? How are you going to handle your licensing and the migration? Their images along with their data. And again, how can you automate that, but also plug that into that management control plane? So that goes into the recurring activities, supporting new users, updating their credentials, their roles, managing the pools, adding the resources, the compute, storage, and network, security, making sure that you're here, the firewalls, the gateways, your identity management, making sure that things are backed up, that they are protected and secured. And then also that updates, remediation, patches, up and down that full stack. But having that insight, what is this costing you? What is the total cost, but what is it costing you for a particular type of user desktop? Informed decisions. Are you over-provisioned, underutilized? Are you under-provisioned and start particular users? So what are the different things that can allow you to manage on a recurring basis? And a few more things here is that I talked about management. Well, that's via a common portal, a common interface, a common dashboard if you prefer. But for those that also like traditional command line, there's the Azure command line interface, PowerShell, different scripts, different templates, as well as third-party tools that assist with that management. I think we're going to hear more about that is where the third-party tools come in particular at scale, with the automation, with the management, initial as well as recurring, with the data protection, licensing cost, giving you that insight so that you're not flying blind, so that you can make those informed decisions around service levels, costing, security, and from the cloud to the on-prem. All right, so this is we're starting to wrap up here because we got some questions I see queued up. Let's start to move in real quickly. What are some best tips, next steps? Well, here we go, real quick. Earlier I mentioned you can give this all a try yourself. If you're not familiar, just simply go microsoft.com/en-us3/virtual-desktop, okay? to learn more, but you can actually set up your own environment, set up a free account, do a proof of concept, figure it out, try things out. But here's a couple things. How and where will you manage from and with what? Okay, you can just use the built-in tools, the built-in dashboards, use scripts, the PowerShell, party tools to plug in. Where do the third-party tools fit into with this, and what value do they bring to the equation? What is your end state or objective? That it all be automated and low cost and everything just simply works, so you can just sit back and into webinars all day long. So what are some simple pros? It's Microsoft. It's integrated with Azure. It's a fork, flexible and scalable types of environment. Now, I got to say this tongue-in-cheek is, what's the con? It's Microsoft. Some will see that as good. Some will see it as a pro. Some will see it as a con. Whatever works for you. And it's also, there's security with VMware or Citrix, but there's also the confusion we touched on of where to use O365 versus M365 versus AVD versus Azure Stack. That's classic Microsoft. That's also that capability that you can use. What are the caveats? That you might need or benefit from third-party management tools. Oh, I'm not going to say it's a con. It's just something being more there, because everything is not the same trying to do and accomplish. All right, real quickly, is your data infrastructure, is your connectivity network ready for AVD or any kind of virtual desktop? What about your security and your data? How will you migrate data and users along with their identities, their credentials, their certificates, and their roles? Information policies, including for scale. Not all workspaces and users are the same, that there's different flexibility, different capability. Again, everything is not the same. Why treat it the same? All right, we're in the home stretch here. Let's wrap up for now. Okay. Again, know your environment, the workloads, and the resources. Management is key. Timely insight and awareness, particularly with the cloud. If you don't have awareness with good relative data, you are flying blind in the cloud, and your instrument good as your data. Understand the differences between Azure Virtual Desktop, O365. Again, what is that desired end state or that integration? There's some more to learn more on my blog, my books. There's a URL there. My Twitter, I'm on StorageIO. And with that, Chris, I think we got some questions. You have time to get into
We
them?
do. We have quite a few questions. Greg, you are breaking up just a little bit, just to let you know. So if there's anything you could do on your end, that would be great. But with that, yeah, let's jump into some questions here. First one comes in from Therese. We have data, Excel with a lot of reference links in US and need to have a user in Europe to access it. In AVD, how can we improve the lag time in accessing the data?
Yeah, it's a good question, and that's where functional components is that if you got your app being served out of, say, a U.S. region, and that using the Azure configure where you can utilize more of the Azure backend, but that you can also do some things with file caching, file syncing to help reduce some of those latency concerns. And that's where a conversation with your different service providers, with your different value-add resellers comes into play.
Okay, Noel just chimed in. I am new to all this. So from what I am seeing is that I can spin up a VDI via Azure and provide my users a VDI so they can access it from anywhere, correct?
Yes.
Like they're just, great. And as you can tell, I'm in the Azure pronunciation camp.
I go back and forth myself.
Here's a great one. Is Azure Virtual Desktop just for Windows desktops and devices?
You can actually consume it from different devices, i.e., it could be a Windows, it could be a Linux, a web browser, it could be Android or an iOS. But likewise, top images themselves do not have to be Windows. They could be Linux-based.
Brian wants to know, how can I effectively integrate and manage local servers and applications in conjunction with cloud-based applications using Azure Virtual Desktop?
Okay, so the one part to it is, there's two parts to this. One is, can you manage the Azure Virtual Desktops that are running out of the, along with other cloud apps and resources, along with something you might have on-prem? And the answer is yes. That's part of where the Azure-based tools, control plane come into play, whether it's Azure Arc, whether it's the command line tools, different things like that. And then that's also where the third parties come to overlay across that and across the different clouds. Now, real quickly, the flip side to that, which gets interesting, is can I put all of my management, i.e. my management staff, could I have them running on virtual desktops where we have a class of workspace, a class of images, of users? And yeah, you could. You want to through. It does open up some interesting possibilities, but there's some interesting things that you need to consider and be prepared for.
Okay, great. Oh, here's a good one. What would be the benefit of AVD versus Win365 Cloud?
It comes down to cost. If you've only got users, few, that's kind of relative, you know. Would I tell somebody with maybe 5 or a dozen users to AVD type environment? Well, the canned answer is probably no, but it might be, well, just wait a minute. Tell me a little bit more about what they're doing and the type of environment, and it might be shift to a maybe, okay? But it's how many are there? How busy are they? What type of work are they doing? Are they just using Office functionality? Well, then that might be an O3, maybe evolve to an M365, but it might also be some economies of scale that say you should probably start looking closer at AVD.
On that note, Chris also has a similar pricing question for you. Do most MSPs double dip charging for managing the physical device and the VDI? Do they charge less for each?
I turn that around and say, when you have a conversation with a managed service, are you double dipping? I would turn that around that way rather than for them. I think that's one of those standard questions that you turn right around to the along with some others to ask, as well as they might squirm about.
Okay, Greg, you are breaking up quite a bit.
Okay.
But let's see. Let's try to get a couple more questions in here before the end of the session. Do we need to have a specific device recommendation to run the VDIs at its best speeds?
That's going to be one of those. Yeah, absolutely. And what your apps are, what the resources they need, how they're functioning, and what do they need. It's not simply here, we got a really cheap cost, and just run your virtual machines on it. What's the networking going to be? And that's MSP, a value-added reseller, value to the table, not just a simple low cost.
Okay, let's end it on this security-related question. Are virtual desktops less secure, more vulnerable to attack threats than regular desktops?
If you let them. Now, that's a little, look, it comes down to you use all the security tools, all the capabilities, them very secure. But your best practices, your policies, is desktop being delivered out on a physical laptop that somebody else is actually using it? Well, do the abilities of going in, the credentials to use the virtual desktop environment versus just going on to part of that is education, some of that is people training policies, procedures, but also disabling certain devices and different things like that. So it's really following and implementing the different best practices and policies so that you don't make it less secure.
Okay, great. That's all the time we have for this first session. Thanks for the great talk, Greg.
And sorry for the bad transmission or voice quality.
Oh, it happens. Thanks so much again. Everyone stay tuned. We're going to take a short break and be back at the top of the hour for our second session of the day, the Modern Azure Virtual Desktop Toolkit, Nerdio Solution Showcase. Take a chance to check out those resources on your console provided by Nerdio, ControlUp, and RIM03, and we'll be right back.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second session of today's online summit, Azure Virtual Desktop 101, Beyond VDI for Your Hybrid Workforce. This event was organized by the hardworking folks at Redmond Magazine, who have brought together some of the best industry experts on today's topic. Many thanks to our sponsors, Nerdio, provider of the premier solution for all things virtual desktops in Microsoft Azure, ControlUp, provider of the leading platform for managing, monitoring, and analyzing virtual desktop and application performance, and RIM03, provider of an intelligent solution designed to modernize Windows package formats and migrate them from legacy to modern workspaces and management planes. Without their support, this event would not be possible. And thanks to you for joining us. I'm John K. Waters, Editor-in-Chief of the Converge 360 Group of 1105 Media, and I'll be your moderator for the second of our 3 information-packed sessions. But before we get started, just a reminder that each of today's sessions is being recorded for later access. Keep an eye out for an email with a link to that recording. It'll be coming your way in the next few days. This session will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. You can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. We'll do our best to get to all of them. Our sponsors have provided some extra resources you won't want to miss. They're available now on your console. At the end of this summit, you'll be asked to take a short survey. We know you guys are busy, but we're hoping you'll take just a moment to give us some honest feedback about today's event. And last but not least, at the end of the third session, one lucky attendee will be receiving a GoPro Hero 10 waterproof action camera. But you must be present to win, so stick with us. Now let's get started with our second session, the Modern Azure Virtual Desktop Toolkit, Nerdio Solutions Showcase. For this session, we've called on Travis Roberts, Product Marketing Manager at Nerdio. Travis is a 2-time Microsoft MVP and Microsoft Certified Trainer with more than 2 decades of experience with Microsoft infrastructure and management. During his long career, he has earned technical certifications from Microsoft, VMware, Citrix, and Cisco. He currently serves on the board of the Minnesota Azure User Group, and he's the developer of Zero to Hero with Azure Virtual Desktop and other Azure-related courses available now on Udemy. I know you guys are in for a great session. Take it away, Travis.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Thanks, John, for the introduction. And I want to get started here. We're gonna get started with what Nerdio is and some of the features that it offers. But let's first have a poll question. I'd like to know. Let's see here. Which VDI solution does your organization use, if any? I'm curious about that. And if you want to take some time to answer, we'll just hop over to the results. And while we're answering that, we can move on. I think I can, let's see. So we'll move on here to Nerdio Manager for Enterprise. Nerdio is an overlay for Azure Virtual Desktop that simplifies management of AVD, Windows 365, and Intune. The goal of Nerdio is to accelerate deployment by simplifying not just AVD, but also the technologies that support AVD, things like Azure File Shares and Azure Automation Runbooks, for example. We also extend functionality into Windows 365 and Intune. We minimize costs with features like advanced auto-scaling, storage right-sizing, and VM size recommendations. In the end, we reduce the complexity and cost in deploying and managing AVD. So Nerdio optimizes to reduce costs. Let's just talk about this next one. Nerdio Autoscale doesn't just start and stop VMs based on the time of day or the number of sessions. We can scale based on the number of available or used sessions, the amount of RAM or CPU used as well. We provide automation that supports many different use cases, things like applying updates or managing settings. Nerdio can add capacity on demand if the host pool reaches a limit to the number of available sessions. Nerdio can also detect when a session host has an issue and take steps to fix that issue or recreate the session host if needed. Nerdio provides one portal to manage multiple services, Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows 365 endpoints and applications. And there's also RBAC roles, so we can give different groups fine-grained permissions to manage items in Nerdio. Let's take a look at how this works next. This is an architecture for a single tenant deployment. We deploy from the marketplace to your tenant, so this isn't something that we host. This is deployed out to your tenant. Nerdio Manager for Enterprise deploys the following services. We deploy app services, a Key Vault, Azure SQL, Azure Automation, Log Analytics, and App Insights. That's the bundle of applications that's used to manage AVD. Permissions are given to access identities and resources in the subscription, and then licensing data and reporting information is sent to Nerdio. Nerdio does not have access back into the customer's tenant. This example is a single tenant deployment. We also support government, GCC High, and Azure China clouds. The multi-tenant deployment is similar to a single tenant deployment. In this configuration, the identities are in the same tenant as the Nerdio is deployed to, as the Nerdio install is deployed to. We also have cross-sovereign cloud deployment options here. The identities are in a different tenant from the Nerdio Manager. And I just put a note in here. I suggest contacting Nerdio if you plan to do a complex cross-tenant deployment. There are a few considerations to be aware of, and we want to make sure that that deployment's successful. Our support team has seen it all, so they'll be able to help you with that configuration. And next, we'll move on to application management. Nerdio takes a holistic approach to Windows application management by centralizing access to applications repositories, automating testing, orchestrating application delivery to Windows devices, and reporting on application usage, licensing, and performance. Nerdio Manager provides a unified application catalog linking multiple private and public repositories that support all Windows application types. It also allows the migration of applications into Nerdio managed private repositories. With unified application catalogs, enterprises can gain access to legacy and modern applications. Nerdio also provides application testing integration with Microsoft TestBase and third-party services. Now that we understand the basics, let's take a look at some common tasks with Nerdio. And what I'm going to do in this next few slides is I'm going to review each feature, and then at the end, we're going to jump in and I'm going to demonstrate how to configure them. So first is WinGet repositories. WinGet is the Microsoft package managing. Sorry, WinGet is the Microsoft Package Manager tool. The WinGet client is in all current Windows client builds by default, so there's no need to add an agent to Windows endpoints to use WinGet. There's a public WinGet repository, and we can also use a private repository. Nerdio makes it really easy to deploy a private WinGet repository in Azure. Once we have our private repository, we'll add an application to the repository. We'll also deploy the application with a policy-driven deployment. After that, we'll review custom images. So we'll go on here to how do you manage your session host images. And a session host, imaging for a session host in AVD is a bit of an art, a bit of a science. There's two very broad categories of how this can work. We can customize. We can start with a gallery image that's available in Azure, and then update the image with all of our apps and settings, and then use that to build an image to deploy out to the session host. Or we can use a basic Windows image to create the session host and then customize that session host with apps and updates after it's created. There's advantages and disadvantages to both, and Nerdio supports both models and a mix of the two if that's what you want to do. Customizing the image used to create the session host means that the session host will be available at the time of deployment. So what do I mean by that? All the applications and settings are there. We deploy the session host, and it's just available. If we deploy a more generic image that needs customization after the fact, we have to deploy that session host into like drain mode so nobody connects to it. And then we have to use whatever platform we're going to deliver those applications and settings to. So this situation would be if a System Center Endpoint Manager or SCOM or SCCM is used, where you can deploy that to a session host after the fact. And again, Nerdio supports both of these models or a mix of the two. Once we have our applications and our image, then we can review deploying, or we can deploy an actual host pool with that image. So I have a poll up next. What is the primary host pool type you deploy or plan to deploy with Azure Virtual Desktop? Personal is a one-to-one mapping, so every user gets their own VM. And then a pooled means we're using a multi-user OS, and multiple people can log into a single VM or session host. I'll push out the results. It looks like we're at about almost 50-50 on that. That's good to know. Thanks for your response. So next I'm going to talk about autoscale. And autoscale sets the capacity of the host pool and defines when VMs are started and deallocated. So the whole goal here with autoscale is in Azure, you pay for compute resources only while it's allocated or running. In the background, we can deallocate a session host. That means powering off and removing it from the underlying Azure hardware, and we don't have to pay for those compute resources while it's deallocated. So it's a benefit to be able to automatically scale down session hosts when they're not needed. Autoscale and with Nerdio, we can define a few things in here. We can define the VM size, the disk type, the image, the host pool capacity. There's burst capacity. So if we hit a point where we need just extra session hosts for a brief period of time, we can accommodate that. Then it's the scale in and scale out logic. How are we going to deallocate or start those session hosts? We can do session host pre-staging. There's end user messaging, and also auto heal. Finally, we'll review scripted actions. So I've got another poll question. I believe this is the last one. How much automation do you use in your organization? I'll just throw the results up. I'm not sure if not seeing any updates. Oh, there we go. Okay. Good, some automation, that's good. So that brings us to scripted actions. Scripted actions are PowerShell scripts that run either in the context of the Windows VM or the session host or in Azure. So we can target either specific session hosts with that or the Azure environment. Nerdio provides a library of pre-created, customizable scripted actions. Nerdio manages and updates these scripts. That's one important thing is things change frequently with Microsoft, and being able to have somebody who's watching those scripts and making sure if a PowerShell module or something changes, we're addressing that. We can also, scripted actions are used to extend the functionality of Nerdio Manager. And one of the things we do is we provide several pre-populated variables that you can use if you decide to create your own scripts for Nerdio. So things like a $sign VM name, we can target the VM that script is running against. A newer feature is the ability to add parameters with custom scripts, and then we can expose these parameters through the UI. Let's see here. Okay, the next, I'm going to jump into the console, and I'm going to show you some of these things we just talked about. So let me share my screen. I'm having a problem sharing the screen.
I'll pop in here really quick. Travis, it's the top right computer symbol with the arrow, and then it should allow you to share.
I'm clicking it, nothing's happening.
And did you click if you want to share a window tab?
Yeah, there's nothing. When I click on it, nothing happens.
When you click on it, and then on the bottom right, in that white box, it should say share.
Okay, I think we got it.
There we go. And I'll confirm once you are up and running.
Is it showing the Nerdio Manager for Enterprise?
We are still not seeing the screen just yet. Okay, everyone, give us 1 second. You're going to hear some hold music, and I'm going to chat with Travis, figure out this little tech issue, and we'll be right back. Hello, everyone. We are still quickly working on a solution so that Travis is able to screen share. At this time, please interact with the resources. Continue to put questions into the inbox. We see a few have come in, and we really appreciate it. Give us 1 or 2 more minutes, and we'll be back as soon as possible. Thank you.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I apologize for that. It seems the demo gods are not smiling on me today. But here we are. We're logged into Nerdio environment, and we're going to start with application management. So if we go to applications, what we have here is the unified catalog. And there are 2 WinGit repositories that I have. We have a WinGit public and the WinGit repo. Microsoft hosts a public WinGit repo. And if we go into settings and into my Nerdio environment, we have 2 listed here. So we're linked to the WinGit public. And if you didn't want to have the public WinGit, some organizations don't want to have public information like that displayed. So we could unlink it. We can also link or add another private WinGit repo. And adding it is pretty simple. We go in and we walk through the steps to add it, give it a name, a resource group, and we can provide a storage account and log analytics workspace, or we can let it create it for us. So now that we have that, we're going to go back to Unified Catalog, and we'll add an application. So if we go to Import Application, we have to select a repository. This is the private WinGit repo. Package ID, every package in a WinGit needs a unique ID. We'll provide a unique ID, but you can update that if you'd like. We'll give it a version. I'll just use one for this. Package name is, we're going to do Notepad++, one of the demo, favorite demo application. And then we'll give it a description. Publisher. I'm just doing this quick, and then license free. And then we come over to installer. Now it defaults to MSIX, and I'll also point out that we can do a file or we can provide a URL. I'm going to do a file for this one, and we'll choose the file. There's Notepad++. And that changes the file type to an exe, so it knows the file type. But we've got a whole list here of file types we can provide. And let's see, then we can go into the install mode, and we want a silent install for this because we're going to install it automatically with a script. And that is /s. And there's also tags, so we can tag the application. These aren't Azure tags, but these are tags we can define on our applications, so we can sort and find them. And that starts the import process. And once we've imported, we should see it pop up here in a second. And there we go. So now we have Notepad++. So let's go to imaging next. If we go to desktop images, and this is the process now. We're going to actually create an image that we'll use for to deploy our session host. We have 2 options. We can add from an existing VM, and we would use that if we have a VM set up. Maybe we have it all configured, everything is pristine, and that's exactly what we want to base our session hosts off from. We would have to provide a URL, a SAS URL for the disk, and we provide information bubbles with more information on how to find that. In this case, though, we're going to add from the Azure library. We'll call this one demo image. You can give it a description. For this, we have the entire, all of the Microsoft Gallery images we can select. I'm going to select 22H2. And we can do, let's see, Windows 10 Enterprise. I want to do Enterprise Virtual Desktop Gen 2 multi-session. So that would be for a pooled host pool. The VM size is not the VM size that we're going to use in our host pool. This is the VM size that we're going to use to build the image. So behind the scenes, once we hit go, we're going to spin up a VM, apply all of our customizations, and then create an image based on that. We can also select a disk. Here we can select premium SSD. The resource group we want to add it to. I want to add it to this Nerdio NME HP. We have the option to join this image to the domain. I'm going to unselect that. We can select this option, do not create an image object. So what this will do is it will take all the steps building the VM, customizing the VM, then it stops. And then we can log into that VM and make sure all of the customizations have applied. We can kind of do a QC. We can also manually add any applications that for some reason we may not be able to automate. And then we can set time zones. And we also have tag groups that we can apply. So here I have a tag group defined. Let's do this one. There we go. So we can add and remove tag groups. So once we're good with that, we'll hit, actually, there's one other thing. I don't want to miss this. So the application management, we want to add an application to this image. Now, we added that to our GitHub repo. So we're going to first uncheck Show Favorites. We're going to add Notepad++. And here we can, let's see here, narrow it down a little bit. We have the WinGit public. But if we scroll down here, we have the WinGit repo one. So this is my private repo. And we have two options. We can select a specific version, or we can go with the latest. If we select latest, it will always deploy the latest version of this application that's available. And then we can come in and add another one. There's from the private repo. So now we're going to add those two applications. We hit OK, and that kicks off the process. Now this takes some time to finish, so I'm going to move on. I've got another image that I'm going to use for the host pool creation. I'm trying to work through this kind of fast, but I think this will still be good. So when we go into workspaces, the workspace is like a landing zone for our users. We publish applications and desktops to workspaces. One workspace can contain applications and desktops from multiple host pools, but a host pool can only publish to one workspace. We can use the default workspace here, but I'm going to add one. So we'll call this one Demo WS. We can give it a friendly name and a description, add a resource group that we want to attach it to or put it in, and then our location. And this will be the location for our host pool as well. We're going to go with Central US, or actually East. There, East US 2 for this one. And then we can select our tag groups as well. And the advantages of that is we can pre-create a tag group, and now I'm tagging all of our resources, all my resources as I created. Now I'm going to enter into this workspace that we just created, and I'm going to create a dynamic host pool. And here we'll add the host pool information, so we'll call it Demo HP. We can give it a description. For the user experience, there's three options here. We can do a multi-user desktop pooled, so that's a traditional pooled host pool. Multi-user remote app pooled, which is publishing remote applications. And if I skip down to the bottom one, single user desktop personal. That's a personal host pool, a one-to-one mapping between user and computer. And the users are assigned a computer, and that's the same, or virtual machine, and that's the same one they use throughout the life cycle of that, unless we as administrators change that. This one, single user desktop pooled, is basically, it's a multi-user desktop, but with a session limit of 1. So we're giving the user a dedicated RAM and compute of that VM, but we're preventing any configuration drift because they won't necessarily log into the same VM next time. So we'll do multi-user desktop. We can select our directory. I have a directory already added to this. It's a Windows AD domain. We can select our FSLogix profiles. I pre-created that, but these are, it's a profile of all the FSLogix settings, including the path to the file directory. And then the name is the name of the session host itself. We're doing a prefix. We can also do a pattern if we want to, but I'm going to do a prefix. Session host is the Windows VM name or computer name is limited to 15 characters. I'm going to call this one demo1sh. And then Nerdio will append a random number at the end of that. Now, here's one of the important things. We go to desktop images, and here is the desktop image that I created previously. So the one we just created, it's still working in the background. We're going to select our VM size. Now, it defaults to a D2 AS, and Microsoft's recommendation for VM core count on a pooled host pool is 4 to 32. There's little advantage going beyond 32. Two 32s perform the same as 164, but you can shut one of the two 32s down. But for the minimum core count, the Windows 10 and 11 multi-threaded OS, the UI interface, it's multi-threaded, and if you only have 2 cores, it can compete with the user threads. So there's some guidance that for a pooled host pool, you should go at least 4, or a minimum of 4. So I'm going to do a D4 AS. And I want to point out here, we've got one grayed out, but we have a D4 AS V4 and a D4 AS V5. They're both the same core count and RAM. The V4, the older version, is a little bit more expensive. And this is one of the guidance we give to people is always watch your versions. And if you have a host pool that's been deployed a while, make sure you're using the most recent version. It is going to be better performing and possibly cheaper. So there we go. And then we can select our OS disk. I'm going to do 128. Let's see here. Premium SSD. We select our resource group. A quick assign is if we want to just give a user who may QA it access to this after it's deployed. And then again, we can assign the tags. And OK. Now, what it's doing is it's creating that host pool in the background, but it's not actually starting or building any VMs yet. It takes us to the auto scale page. And here are some of the settings we already defined. We have the names, image type. And what I want to show is if we come down here to running OS disk, we've got that 128 gig premium. But we can do this, we can change the disk type when we stop or deallocate that VM. So when you deallocate a VM, you stop paying for the compute and RAM, but you still pay for the storage. So what we're doing is when we deallocate a VM, we're going to switch the storage from the premium SSD to a standard SSD. And then when we go to start it again, we'll switch it back to a premium SSD. So you're not losing any performance. You're just paying for a little bit less when it stopped. We have host pool sizing. We can define when the AVD agent is available. Is it available when the VM starts? Or, I'm sorry, when the host is available, when the VM starts, or when the agent is available. I'll leave it as agent available. the base host pool capacity. This is how many machines we're going to build. I'm going to just set this, well, I'll leave it at 5 for now. Then we have a minimum host capacity. So this means it's going to build 5, but it will always have 1 on, so that we always have capacity. And then we have this burst beyond capacity. So what happens is if we grow to 5, let's say, I don't know, I'm in up in the north, we have snow days sometimes. Let's say that there's a circumstance where we're going to go beyond a 5 session host worth of capacity. Nerdio is now allowed to spin up to 2 extra hosts to facilitate extra capacity during that time. It does take a little bit longer. It takes about 15, 20 minutes or so to spin up a new VM, but at least it will eventually be available, so we can scale beyond that, scale beyond what that base host capacity is. Now we go into the scaling logic. We have a few things here. Some environments, like a call center, may have a very consistent CPU and RAM usage, depending on who's logging in. There's not a lot of variables or variation. But other environments, maybe it's pretty constant, but every once in a while, a couple times a month, somebody runs a report that uses a lot of CPU or RAM. We can auto-scale based on either CPU, RAM, for those types of environments, or we can go with average active sessions or available sessions. And then user-driven that's the auto start on connect, where we're starting VMs or session hosts as needed. And then we can set the maximum sessions per host. We'll go 5 here. And now we can set how many sessions we should always have available. Now we already said that we're going to leave 1 on, but if we went to 6 here, now it would always have 2 available. I'm going to change that back to 1, and then our load balancing is a breadth first or depth first. We can set scaling restrictions. So let's say we wanted to grow, but we don't want to scale in during business hours. We can come in and say between we are only going to stop or remove session hosts from 6 p.m. to like 7 a.m. And then we have aggressiveness. So aggressiveness, high session hosts with active or disconnected sessions will be turned off. So that's going to impact users. Medium, it will deallocate or shut down session hosts with disconnected sessions on it. And then low, it will only shut down session hosts with no active or disconnected sessions. Let's go medium. I worked for a law firm a while ago, and that high, the idea of booting people off at the end of the day just wouldn't have flown. But I know other environments that may be what they want to do. And then we can also deactivate drain mode for hosts. Let's go to pre-stage. So in pre-stage, we can set, let's say, going back to the call center example, everybody starts exactly at 8. We can come in here and say, you know what, at 7:30, let's say, we want to start 3 of our session hosts. So that's just going to handle that login storm. We can get these started half an hour before everybody starts logging in to make sure that they're ready. And then we can also do a scale and delay. So we're saying for 1 hour, so between 7:30 and 8:30, we are not going to scale in. We're just going to leave those 3 running. If we do force log off for users, we can set the message here, and there's also a timeout. And then we're coming down here to auto heal broken hosts. Here we can define a few things. So if a host has problems, either it's unavailable, we have a lot of options here. If an upgrade fails, if it's disconnected, we can mark that as broken, and we can also define if there has no sessions, no active sessions, or even if it has active sessions. It's going to wait 10 minutes, and then it's going to restart, wait 10 minutes, and that's set down here. restart again, and then if a second restart doesn't fix it, it will delete and recreate that session host. Now, one thing I need to do is I need to enable autoscale. So once I enable autoscale and save and close, autoscale is going to build those 5 session hosts and start that autoscale process. So it will bring them online as needed and take them offline based on how we set that. Now I'm going to come down to, let's see here, desktop images. Because one of the things that commonly happens is we would have to update our images and our session hosts. So what we can do is if we come in here, and I'm going to use this existing image as an example, I'm going to go to Run Script. And here are the scripted actions that I was talking about. We're going to update this. We have a Windows 10 update script that will also restart. And I want to run this on my image every month so I know it's up to date. So I'm going to set a schedule. I'm going to come in here and say, let's say 1 a.m. And then I want this to repeat. So Patch Tuesday is the second Tuesday of the month. It's not always intuitive or easy to calculate that out. We have it listed here. We can just say repeat on Patch Tuesday. We have the logic built in. And you can even say, let's say nobody likes to patch right away after the patches are released. We're going to say 2 days. So now we've got a schedule that 2 days after Patch Tuesday, we are going to run updates at 1 a.m. on this base image that we created. Now we'll save and close. And the next question is how do we patch those existing session hosts? Because we just patched the image, we haven't dealt with the session host yet. So if we go into workspaces, we're going to go into that host pool we just created. We can go into hosts and we can do a run script. And we could run the same script. It's a very similar process. We go update Windows 10, and then we can do the same schedule. We can also add a message because it could force log off. But the problem with that is it could introduce configuration drift because now we're updating an image and 3 session hosts, or 5, independently. And the other option is if we go into host, we can go resize reimage. And we select our image. Remember, this is updated the second 2 days after the second Tuesday of every month. We'll leave the size, although if you did want to build a different VM size, you can do that here as well. Leave the OS disk. We can process it in groups. So let's say we're going to do 2, and then we're going to set a schedule. And we're going to say at 1 a.m., 3 days after Patch Tuesday. Now we're going to force a reimage. So this is a pooled host pool. There should be nothing unique on that session host. What we're doing here is we're rebuilding the session host. So this is going to prevent any configuration drift. Okay, how did I do? How are we doing on time? Because that actually is the demo.
Well, we're just about out of time, but we do have time for a couple of quick questions.
Okay.
Very quickly go. Okay, here's one. Is an agent required for Nerdio?
No, there's no agent. And even with the WinGit, deploying those applications, there's no... The actual agent is built into the OS, so that's a Microsoft product, and it's available.
Okay, here's one. Does it matter if we already have Azure Virtual Desktop installed?
No, we can. So if you have AVD already installed, you can point Nerdio at it, and that comes in as something called a static host pool. If you notice, when we were creating the host pool, we created a dynamic host pool. If you have existing ones, you can point Nerdio at it. It'll come in as what's called a static host pool. And with that, there's no auto scale on it, but it's a migration step. You can then turn that static into a dynamic host pool. And when you do that, Nerdio reconfigures to make sure that all of the assets or all the resources are tagged appropriately, and Nerdio has rights to manage it.